This is Only the Strong Survive, a podcast powered by Khan Media, where we dive deep into the world of business, leadership, and innovation. I'm your host, Dan Khan, and I'm honored to have you join us today. So, let's get ready to learn some survival skills together. Welcome back to Only the Strong Survive, a business and entrepreneurship podcast presented by Khan Media. Today, I'm very excited to have Juro Kushnir and Adra Kushnirova joining us on the show today, the dynamic duo behind Alaska Fresh, a growing business whose mission is to make wild salmon more accessible to underserved areas. Based in eastern Wisconsin, Juro and Adra have a really interesting entrepreneurial story, and I'm excited to hear more about it, and I think you guys will find it interesting too. You know, small business stories are the heart of our country, of our mission, and we as entrepreneurs and leaders can certainly learn a lot from how people kind of pick themselves up, build a business, get an idea, grow it, bootstrap it, do it from, kind of the ground up. And I'm personally interested in their story. I've actually tried their products. They're excellent. And I spent some time in Alaska this past summer with my family. And boy, I'll tell you, if you haven't had fresh Alaskan salmon, it is incomparable to the sort of farm stuff you get at the local supermarket. So it really is a pretty amazing difference. So I'm personally interested in hearing their story as well. So Juro and Adra, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Yes.
I have a lot of questions. So first of all, can you give me some background? I assume you two are a couple. Is that right?
Yes. We're a married couple.
Okay. So you're a married couple. You started a business together. You're sitting there talking to us right now in Wisconsin. We actually have quite a few clients in Wisconsin. It's a lovely area, but it's not known for Alaskan seafood. So I'm trying to figure out, how did this all start? Before we even get into Alaska Fresh, like, how did you meet and how did kind of this all come about?
So this all goes back to 2005 when I was in college in Slovakia. That's where I'm from. And I had an opportunity to go to the United States to participate in a summer work and travel program. And while everybody else was going to be a lifeguard and work at a restaurant and go to a summer resort, I decided to go to a fish processing plant in a small town in Alaska called Cordova to just have some crazy wild experience for one summer and then move on with my life. Well, I did one summer and I fell in love with the place and with the industry and with everything around the wild Alaskan Copper River salmon. That's basically the best salmon in the world. I started coming back every summer for following years. And that's basically where we are now. I spent 13 summers going to Alaska. And then at one point, I met Adra and she joined me and she can take the story from there.
Yeah. So we met in Chicago at a conference. We were both working in immigration at the time. And that's how I know Beth back from our days in cultural exchange. And Juro was bringing students to Alaska to work for their summer break. And I was on the receiving end. And our relationship grew. And like Juro said, I joined him for a few summers in Alaska. And we were going back and forth and decided to settle full time in Wisconsin, where I'm from. But we really wanted to keep our relationship open with Alaska. So we decided to start Alaska Fresh. And also, after our last summer in Alaska, our friends and family were like, oh my God, where are we going to get our fish from? So we started our business and we started selling to our friends and family first.
When was that again?
That was in 2018.
Okay. So we're 6 years into this deal now. So
yeah.
Walk me through the process. Because I mean, Alaska, logistically, not super easy to get around. I mean, when I was planning my trip with my family, I was sort of shocked because we didn't do like the cruise ship thing, right? And we flew into Anchorage and spent a couple of weeks just kind of cruising around in a rental truck. And it's hard to even get around that state. There's not that many roads. So you're in a little tiny town. And I had to admit, I had to Google Cordova. So where is Cordova and why Cordova?
So Cordova is in South Central Alaska. And it was just kind of a coincidence that that's where I decided to go for my summer work and travel 20 years ago. But Cordova is also the home of Copper River salmon, Copper River Sockeye, Copper River King, Copper River Coho salmon. And that's known to be the best salmon in the world that's commercially caught because the river is very cold and very strong and the salmon really has to build up excellent fat content and nutrients to survive. Just coincidentally, I ended up in the town with the best salmon in the world. And yes, like you said, there is no road going to Cordova. If you want to go there, you have to go on a boat or you have to fly there, which makes it just that much more romantic and that much more complicated to do a business with. That's part of it. And that's the connection we wanted to have after we got back home, because Cordova, that was our second home basically. So we wanted to have a business that would support specifically Cordova and fishermen from Cordova. And we wanted to introduce this, best salmon in the world to the American Midwest, and then eventually to the American lower 48, which is the Alaskan name for the continental U.S.
To walk through the process for people who don't understand, because you're absolutely right, and that's something that shocked me when we went there, is that seaplanes are everywhere, like little seaplanes, just getting around, unless you're on the Kenai Peninsula, is not super easy. You fly in and you're spending your first summer there when you're on that work exchange program. When you talk about commercial fishing, are these commercial fishing boats that are going out, or is this on the river and they're how are they pulling these fish out of the water, and what kind of scale are we talking about here? What does the season look like there?
Yes, great question, because the name is deceiving, Copper River, but the fishing doesn't happen in the river. It happens in the ocean that's just outside of the delta of this river. And the delta is about 80 miles long, so the area is massive where the fishing is happening. However, when somebody says commercial fishing, people picture these huge trawler boats, and that's not how it is with this high quality salmon. It's caught with boats called gill netters or bow pickers. Those are small boats with usually 1 or 2 people. They're 20, 25 feet long. And that one individual is on that boat, putting his net in the water and battling the ocean just to get his few fish. And as the fish are coming onto the boat, he has to literally with his hands untangle every single fish out of that net. Then he bleeds it, and then it goes on the ice. It's a very manual and very careful process, because the fishermen also know, this is the best salmon in the world. We can't just treat it like it's just some kind of regular piece of fish. But yes, the fishing happens in the ocean. It happens in a large area in small boats. And then the small boats deliver either directly to the processor that's in Cordova, or they deliver to a little larger boat that's called a tender. That's kind of like a truck that then takes it to the processing plant. And the fish get processed in Cordova, and from there, they can go out to the world.
The little bit of time I spent up there, I was really impressed with the fact that, and I don't know if this is the case with the fishermen you work with, it seems like most of them are very small operations. These are little kind of family-owned deals where there's 1 or 2 or 3 people on a boat. These aren't big enterprise things, right? These are mostly kind of small independent owner-operators that are kind of working within an ecosystem. Has that been your experience with the fishermen you work with as well?
For salmon fishing specifically, yes, that's exactly how it is. 1, 2, 3. If it's the same boat, there might be 5 people on the boat. So yes, for salmon fishing, that's exactly how it is. There are these large boats in Alaska that fish for crab and pollock and other species, but they are all in the Bering Sea.
Right. Like the TV show, right? Deadliest Catch and all that.
Like the TV show, exactly.
I just wanted to add, the fleet that we sourced from is about 500 boats, and it's really hard to get into that community. You have to buy a permit that fluctuates based on the market price. It's like a piece of property. It can go from low $100,000 to $250,000.
Oh, the fishermen have to buy in. So it's almost like a taxi medallion in New York kind of thing. You have to.
Yes.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And there is only so many of them. It's a capped group. So if you want to buy a permit, you have to buy it from someone.
Yeah. So there's the permit, and then a lot of times it's handed down generationally, or if one comes on the market, then you can be lucky enough to snap it up. And then you have the cost of a boat, which is usually another $250,000, and then all the supplies that you need for the season.
And I was impressed that Fish and Game up there, and I don't know if that's what they call that department, but where I live, it's called Fish and Game, but they're really dialed in on monitoring populations and counts. And they really are protective of that resource, right? They don't want it to be overfished, and they know what they have up there. So I assume that's part of your business as well, as the season and yields and all that.
100%. And fishing games is very respected up there. People understand. They want the fish to come back. None of the fishermen want the fish to disappear after a season or 2. And also the fishing game, the science behind it, it just blew my mind when I learned about it, that there is an actual sonar in the Copper River. It cannot be obviously in the ocean, but all these fish, they go into that one river. So in a narrower point in the river, they have a sonar, and they count all the fish that go up the river. They can tell the difference between a king salmon and a sockeye salmon in this process. So you can literally watch a counter online that will tell you this much fish went up the river today, this much fish yesterday, this is what we expected today and yesterday, this is where we are for the season, projections and predictions. It's quite incredible. At the same time, they fly planes over the ocean and over the river to see how the fish are moving and what's happening. So there is a lot going into it. But yes, the fishing is very regulated. I'm not going to say most regulated in the world, but it's kind of a poster child for sustainable fishing, how salmon is fished in Alaska.
That's good.
And the Alaskan Constitution actually has sustainability baked into it. When Alaska gained its statehood, there's a clause that says the natural resources will be sustainably managed by the state government.
I wish we all had that. That's cool. Okay, so going back in time, I need to learn more. So you're a 18, 19-year-old this first round. You get to Cordova. I got to imagine a fish processing plant is not a particularly glamorous job. What's that like? Walk us through that whole experience.
So, especially the first year, I really got christened by the fire right there because there was a lot of fish caught that year. But the company that I started working for wasn't really well prepared for that. So we never had enough employees, and there was still a big pool of people who thought they can just go to Alaska and make it there, and they couldn't. So we had a lot of criminals and problematic people. I mean, I have so many wild stories from my years there. But after I got there, I was a college student studying journalism. When I was at work, I was at a computer, and all of a sudden I was standing at this processing line. It's called a slime line. And my job was to hold this little vacuum and vacuum out guts and blood out of a fish. And there's blood everywhere and guts everywhere, and it's all over your face. And you do that for about 16 hours. And then you go and you sleep for about 5 hours. And then you do it for another 18 hours. And that's your prospect. This is what I'm going to be doing for the next 3-4 months. It was definitely a learning experience. I got really lucky that season was the way it was because the company needed to promote people to help them get through the season. And one of the owners, his name's Pip Fillingham, and we later became friends, and we're friends to this day. He kind of identified me as somebody with potential to maybe become a supervisor, and he promoted me to be a supervisor of a caviar ecura department. And that's mostly how my career there took off. It was still incredibly hard work. And I worked about 100 hours every week during my first season for about 13 to 15 weeks. So it was a lot. After that, I just fell in love with it.
So the fish come in, and I assume they're coming in like the boat unloads, and the fish come in whole, and they go down the slime line. That sounds gross. And then, so right on the line, you guys. So how manual or automated is it as they're being gutted? And I'm assuming filleted and then cleaned and vacuum packed and then flash frozen and then prepared to ship. Is that kind of generally how it works?
Generally, the first step is called heading and gutting. Pretty self-explanatory, because you want to remove the head first and the guts, because that's what spoils on the fish first. So first you cut the head off, then you open the fish up and you take the guts out and you take the eggs out and you clean up the insides from the blood that's in there. Once you have that done, all the other process is kind of secondary. It can sit on ice for a little bit before you fillet it, turn it into portions, and then some of the fish fly out into the world on planes fresh. Some get processed right away into fillets or portions. Some get vacuum packed, some don't. But the first processing needs to happen as quickly as possible, especially at the beginning of the season. If the fish show up at 11 p.m., then your workday starts at 11 p.m. And if there is 40 hours worth of fish processing, then you're probably going to work for about 20 and then take a quick little nap. And then you're going to do another 20 because there's no time to wait. You got to go and you got to do it fast.
Wow. Is there a village or a town where this plant is, or is there a bunkhouse where the employees are sleeping right on site? How does that all work?
That was another part that made this job really difficult when I became the general manager of the branch. That, yes, we actually had to house all the employees. So they all live on site, almost literally at the processing plant. The processing is at the ground floor, and then on the first floor there is an office and the bunkhouse, and then there is another adjacent building that's more bunkhouse. Then you have to feed them, you have to house them, so you have to deal with all of their problems at work and outside of work. And being in charge of 150 adults with different backgrounds and life stories during a grueling fishing season where they have to work harder than they ever did in their life, it was challenging.
And in my experience, people who go to opportunities like that are either running to something or they're running away from something. So,
yes.
Seems like you might have your hands full. So you worked your way up to GM, and now you're dealing with running a fish processing plant while also dealing with some pretty wild personalities, I'm sure.
I was very good friends with the whole local police department.
I bet. I bet. That sounds interesting. I want to hear some of those stories. And Adra, you woke up one day and you met this handsome guy and said, I want to go work on the slime line. Like how did, like, tell me about that story? Because that sounds interesting too.
That was a little bit of a draw, but the biggest draw was, well, obviously being with Juro, but going to Alaska. Actually, when I was younger, my dream job was to be a tour guide in Alaska. So it's kind of like, be careful what you wish for. I mean, that was just an amazing opportunity. And yeah, every May through September for 4 years, I was in the town of Cordova, where all this slime lining and employee management was happening. And living in a small town like that was an experience of a lifetime. There is no next day Amazon Prime delivery. If you want heavy whipping cream, be prepared to spend $26 on a carton. Ripe avocados, what is that? But then also there's just the beauty of nature, seeing moose when you're driving. We had sea otters out of our front window, and just being part of a community where everybody knows your name. And, you know, when you make plans to go out at night, you don't have to call a bunch of people to make a meetup point. You just go to one of the 3 bars in town and find everyone, you know. It was a really unique experience for sure.
So you guys were kind of, at that point, you got together and you're kind of going kind of seasonally. Is that right? You would probably, were you leaving in the winter and then coming in the summer? Is that?
Yes, we were in Alaska in the summer. I was there normally from April to September. That was the good part. The rest of the year you have off. So
we were in Slovakia for
Right.
a couple winters together because Juro was working as a sports journalist, broadcasting hockey games on television. So for 2 seasons, we were going from Slovakia to Alaska. Then we were going from Wisconsin to Alaska. And yeah, it was nice to have the winters off. We got together, we were dating, and then we became engaged during that time. And then we actually got married in Alaska
on a fishing boat.
on a fishing boat by Captain Pip.
How cool.
And when you are a resident of Alaska, you automatically get the right to marry someone, to marry a couple once without becoming ordained, because there are so many homesteaders and people are so spread out there. There isn't always someone with that qualification to perform that service. So our marriage license says officiant Captain Pip.
That's cool.
And we were married on his boat called the Whatever. And we decided that would be a good mantra for our marriage. And it's worked.
I love it. So what year did you get married?
2014. It was 9/11, 2014.
Okay.
And the reason was that was a day when I didn't have to be at the processing plant that day. So we figured that's a good day to get married. It was like a Wednesday or something.
It sounds like you really kind of worked your way up understanding the business, which is a great foundation. When did the idea come around to start your own business selling salmon?
So after going back and forth for 13 seasons, and for Adra, it was like, 4 or 5, we decided it's time to settle down a little bit and start a family. And the back and forth really wasn't family friendly that much. So I had to quit my job in Alaska. And first, it was kind of exciting, a new chapter. But very, very, very quickly, I started missing the idea of being connected with Cordova and being connected with salmon and fishing and fish. So summer 2017 was my last season as a GM in Cordova. And in April 2018, we started Alaska Fresh. And at the time, we started it as just a side business, mostly like Adra said earlier. So we have some sort of way to bring fish for our friends and family, but it just kind of started growing at that point, and it's been growing ever since.
So in the beginning, before you even started Alaska Fresh, I assume you could sort of set aside a bunch of frozen salmon and then you would just bring it back to Wisconsin for your friends and family. Is that, or you would ship it, that kind of thing?
Exactly.
Yeah, the best way is to, if you are traveling to Alaska and you want to take fish back, and I don't know if you did this, Dan, but the best way to do it is to get a box and check it as a piece of luggage.
We filled our freezer
Smart.
with so much fish that I thought it would last forever. And then in 3 months, it was gone and everybody was really depressed. So it's an excuse to go back. Love it. So then What you're talking about, though, is really interesting. Was the business idea always to go direct to consumer, or was it originally, were you going to try and set up some sort of like supply chain to go to like local markets, or was it always from the beginning like an e-com idea?
From the very beginning, that was my idea. Kind of allow people who are far away from Alaska, who are far away from source of excellent wild seafood, make it simple and make it convenient and affordable, make it also easy to get. So the e-commerce was, the easiest thing to build, but it was also very convenient for the customer. And at that time, back in 2018, there weren't really that many companies. Now the competition, there are way more of them. But back then, it wasn't that common that you could just go online and find wild Alaskan salmon or halibut or sablefish and buy, a box of it and get it on a subscription, or just buy one box and just get it delivered to your door. So it was a relatively new idea at the time. Just to simply answer your question, yes, direct to consumer was right away the idea.
I feel like with tools like Shopify and things like that, the building out of the website would be the easy part. How does the supply chain work? Like it comes from the processing plant in Cordova, and do you have some sort of warehouse in Alaska, or is it in Wisconsin? Because you're moving a perishable item. So I imagine that makes it even more challenging that it has to stay frozen this entire time. And then you've got to figure out once it gets to the lower 48, how to get it out to the consumer. So how did you figure all that out, especially if you're one of the first in the market to do something like that?
Well, what really helped was that I had so much experience working with fish. So I knew what I could and couldn't do and what I needed to do to keep the quality at the top level where I wanted to be. So that was a great base. After that, there was trial and error to the process to find really the cheapest and quickest and safest way to get the fish from Alaska to me. So the way it works is after it's done and it's processed, it comes to us right away. It's been going mostly on a plane on Alaska Airlines, and it flies to Milwaukee, and here we store it in our warehouse and pack it into smaller orders for our finished or final clients. And
so you're shipping, I assume, something big coming from Alaska Airlines, right? Like, is it like a crate? Are you able to keep it frozen on the flight? Is that how that works?
It's about 30 to 50 pound boxes that are packed in a certain way to stay frozen during the process. But also Alaska Airlines is the best airlines to ship perishable product because they understand what it is and how important and how valuable it is. Basically, the only layover we get is in Seattle. And whenever there is a layover, or even if there isn't, if there is just a couple hours between the flights, they have a freezer there and all the product goes into the freezer. So it's never out of the freezer for more than the actual duration of the flight. But also this year, as we're growing, we're going to be able to ship more fish in actual reefer vans. So they're going to be under controlled temperature all the way from Alaska all the way to Milwaukee.
But you're not driving them from Alaska to Milwaukee.
I'm not, but somebody is.
Oh, wow. Interesting. Okay. So like on the Alcan Highway or something like that? Is that how and wow, that's really cool.
That way. And it also often goes on barges. So there's regular, you can call it a boat service, those big shipping barges that you see that goes from China to United States or anywhere in the world. There are some like that go from Seattle to Alaska and then just go back and forth and bring cargo up and then bring frozen seafood back down.
So it would have like a reefer container that stays cold on it, and that would keep everything inside frozen.
Exactly.
Wow, that's really interesting. Boy, that's a learning curve to figure all that out from the logistics. That's really interesting. So you started the business, you said in 18. So that's not terribly long that you're in business and you're trying to make it work and figuring things out. And then all of a sudden 2020 happens and all of a sudden everyone's locked in their house and doing a lot more cooking. I assume, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm going to take a wild guess and assume that might have actually helped your business. Is that the case?
Yeah, that definitely helped our business with everyone watching YouTube videos on how to cook fish and everyone just getting used to groceries delivered to their doorstep, because that was also a more familiar concept that came out of the pandemic. And I actually left my full-time job in cultural exchange in 2020, and I was just so burnt out. I only had energy to go sell fish in a parking lot. So I started doing farmers markets. So we do a number of farmers markets in the Milwaukee area. And so I've been working full time on the business since the middle of 2020. And Juro just left his day job a few weeks ago. So we're both all in now.
Congratulations. That's really cool.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And you mentioned earlier starting a family. So do you guys have kids?
Yes.
Yes. We have one son, Vinny. He's a year and a half. And all of Juro's 20-hour days and 100-hour weeks were really good practice for being up in the middle of the night with our son. So I would like to thank the Alaskan fishing industry for that training.
That's pretty funny. Well, so you start this business. I assume it's growing kind of organically. The lockdown happens. And I think at the same time, because you're right, suddenly people are kind of stuck at home. They're cooking at home. There was a sort of a cultural shift where you're absolutely right. I think up until that point, the concept of, I think Amazon Prime that you mentioned earlier is not so available in Cordova, did a good job kind of indoctrinating people to having stuff delivered to their porch. But boy, all of a sudden 2020 happens and grocery delivery and DoorDash and that thing, it just explodes. So it sort of trains everyone that this is okay and this is good. And at the same time, something that I've noticed in my family, and I don't know if this is something you guys are experiencing as well, is there seems to be something in the zeitgeist right now where there's a lot more conversation happening about like where your food comes from. And rather than just like showing up at the supermarket and just taking whatever's under the saran wrap and eating it, people are asking a lot more questions. You know, where did this beef come from? How was it raised? I mean, even like things like eggs. Like I have so many friends now that are raising chickens because they want to have free range eggs. I don't think when we were kids, that was much of a talking point. And it seems like it is now. Is that something that you're experiencing as well, where people are kind of interested in where the fish is coming from, how it was sourced, that kind of thing?
Yeah, 100%. People want to know the story. They want to see it on the map. They want to know who the fisherman is, the name of the boat. Do we use deadliest catch boats? And, what's the timing of how long the fish is out of the water until it's processed? They want to know the details of the supply chain. And I think with everyone spending more time on social media and seeing these stories come up, and then also like having that lived experience of having chickens and foraging for their own food, they know that they can have access to that information. So I think consumers, they expect it now.
Let's talk about sales and marketing for a minute. Over the years, how have you marketed the business? Who's your target customer? How do you reach them? How have you grown the business? And especially if you're both going all in full time now with a family at home, that's no small risk. So it's got to work, right?
Yes.
It's got to work. And that's something that we are probably working on the most right now. It's the sales and marketing and building a good strategy, really continuing and accelerating the growth. Because up until this year, like we've had a website and we did have some social media, but it was like social media was almost nothing. The website hasn't been changing much. We have invested almost nothing. The marketing, the growth that we've been experiencing over the last 6 years has been mostly organic and word of mouth. And that's what motivated us to now go all in, because every year we had a plan of like, okay, let's see if we can grow 10%. Or then there's a year when Vinny was born. So it's like, okay, we have a new baby now. Let's just see if we can maintain the same sales. And I think the year Vinny was born, we like doubled the sales without really trying to do that. So we figured, you know what, let's just try to go all in this year and see if we can make it work. So we are in the process to fully figuring out who exactly is our target consumer and how to get to them properly, how to get the sales, how to get the repeat sales.
We're throwing things at the wall and seeing what sticks. I would say our target audience is mostly like 30 and up, 35 and up, middle class consumers, because our product is not cheap, right? It's limited. There's a lot of labor that goes into it, and it's for foodies who do have money to spend. But with that being said, we are offering smaller quantities of our fish to make it accessible and affordable. I went on a TikTok spree a couple weeks ago, and I don't think TikTok is our audience. It's so hard with all the channels, right? It's like, do I do TikTok or Instagram or Facebook? And then it's like that, like, you're in it.
Yeah. As a professional marketer, I can tell you I have very mixed feelings about TikTok. It is an opportunity. And I think surprisingly, there's actually in my head, when I first started messing around with it, I thought, oh, this is totally a Gen Z thing. It's not. I mean, there is a substantial audience there, and the opportunity for growth with their algorithms is pretty impressive. It is also so addictive. oh my God, like I won't let my kids anywhere near it because it's just like they've got that algorithm so figured out. Once you start flipping through videos, you can't stop. And next thing you know, you've wasted 40 minutes of your day. So as a marketer, I think it's great. As a father, I think it's maybe not so good. But you're right. And I think picking the right platform and doing it really, really well is better than trying to do everything all at once. And that can be a challenge for some entrepreneurs. You're figuring out who your customer base is. You're growing. You're figuring out the marketing side of things. And then as you scale the business, and I assume you guys have had this conversation, what's the goal down the road? Is it, hey, we want to just keep running this thing and support our family? Do you want to take over the fish distribution direct to consumer business? Do you want to sell it at some point? Like, what's the long-term goal with the business?
We do have a plan or a goal, what we want to do. And the goal is give our business 10 years and see where it is in 10 years. Obviously, it will have to be 10 successful years because we still need to eat during those years. If we can grow this business enough, I'm not going to say the number out loud publicly just so I don't jinx it, but we do have a number in mind where we want to get it in 10 years. And if we do get it there, we are thinking of just selling it after 10 years and then retiring early and just enjoying our lives and our son and maybe our more children. And the business, we love it and we're having a lot of fun with it. And the flexibility of being a business owner, all of this is amazing, but nothing beats having time to spend with your child or with your children and with your family and enjoying the days that you were given on earth. So we are trying to just make enough money to be on a perpetual vacation afterwards.
That sounds great. Sign me up. It's very clear, having heard your story, that you have a serious work ethic, both of you. The hours you have to pull to do what you're talking about before you even started Alaska Fresh is impressive. So the grind part, and that's the thing that not a lot of people talk about, is when you start a business, you're right. The freedom and the flexibility is great. The flip side of it is there is no such thing as 9 to 5. You're working whenever you need to do the job. And it sounds like you were already kind of indoctrinated into that culture from your prior gig. I do have a question though, and you are our first husband and wife partner interview. And, I've been in business with my company since 2008, and I've since started a couple of other businesses. And my wife is extremely supportive, and she has her own small business, but we have a great relationship. But we are not business partners. We are life partners. And I wonder what it would be like if we were business partners. And so I have a lot of questions about that. So how has that been for you? Does it ever add any extra stress? Is it a benefit? How do you make that work when you're both working long hours and you're raising a son and you're trying to get this thing first off the ground, and now it is off the ground and trying to grow it and sustain it? And how does that all work with kind of the dynamics in your marriage as well as in your business?
I'll start with this one. I think it helped that when we met, we were business partners, essentially. Like Juro was my company's client, and we worked in that capacity for a little while. We had a long distance relationship in the beginning, so communication was key, and we really dialed that in. I am very high strung, and Juro is very laid back, so that helps. There's definitely points in the, Juro has only been off of his day job for the last 3 weeks, and I'm sure more than a handful of times I've said, like, is this gonna work? So just keeping the communication flowing is the most important thing. Communication, taking breaks, exercising, getting outside, eating, using HALT. Are we hungry, angry, lonely, tired? I don't know. We've been in this flow for so long. So far it's worked. And before we both went all in, we got to the point of having the conversation, like, are we going to continue this business? Because it got to the point where it was just too much for the both of us not to be in it. And we had hired someone, and that person was not a good fit. So we determined we should both go in, and we had the conversation, like, are we going to do this or are we not? And part of that conversation was like, yeah, this is going to be us working together 24 hours a day. Sometimes when we need to get the stuff done, definitely like talking through it and seeing like what things are going to look like. That was part of the equation as well.
I like that. I never heard HALT before either. That's good.
Oh, yeah. It's a staple in our house.
All right. Now, how often do you go back to Alaska now that this is a going concern? Is that something where you have to go back and check on suppliers and meet with people, or has it sort of established enough that you don't need to do that as much?
It's pretty established. Like, we haven't been in a couple of years, but we want to go. That's one thing. We have a lot of friends there. We have a lot of connections that we want to go see and visit our friends. We want to take our son. But at the same time, yes, it's very valuable to go back and check the supplier, make sure the relationship just continues to be warm, make sure all the details are done exactly the way you want it. Being in this fish business for so long, I'm very particular about how I want things to look and how I want my fish to be and what I consider top quality. So I want to be there when it's processed and when it's getting ready. And especially now that we're trying to grow, it's going to be a much larger purchase of fish than what we had in the past. So absolutely, I'm going to be there and I'm going to see every single piece go down the processing line and make sure that every one of them look perfect.
So is that part of the plan moving forward, is maybe more frequent visits is there like a harvest season, I guess? Is it the whole summer, or is there like a particular window where you'd want to be there more than others?
That's a great question. So we sell various types of fish and seafood from Alaska, and some of them have a fairly long season. Let's say halibut or blackcod, you can buy anytime between like March and October. But our staple, our bestseller, our number one product is the Copper River sockeye salmon and Copper River king salmon. While the season for these two types of fish goes from about mid-May to about early to mid-July, when the season starts, these fish are just out of the world, extremely expensive because they are the first salmon that are available in Alaska every year. So the demand is huge. So at the beginning, the price goes to, for sockeye salmon, you can pay $30, $40, $50 a pound. And for king salmon, you can pay over $100 a pound. So that's a lot. But as the season kind of keeps going, the first craze gets satisfied and then the price goes down. And there is about 2 to 3 week window when this incredible fish can be bought for a reasonable price. Not cheap, it's never cheap, but for a reasonable price before the season's over. So if you wait too long, you might have nothing. But if you don't wait long enough, you might buy it for too much. So like I said, we maybe have 2 week, maybe 3 week window to decide, okay, we want our fish now. That's when I'm going to go to Alaska and make sure that this happens. And at the same time, visiting and being there and forming the relationships, we like to go there when the season opens. Like the opening day of the fishing season for salmon in Cordova is a huge deal. There is usually like a nice king salmon that's flown on the plane to Seattle, and then the red carpet is rolled out and fish is presented on the red carpet. And Alaska Airlines actually has a plane that's called the Salmon 30 Salmon, and it has a salmon painted on the side, and it's just a big deal. There's all kinds of TVs and big chefs and big people in seafood are visiting Cordova and just being part of this. So that the first fish, the season opener in Cordova, that's like a huge deal. So we always like to go there at that time.
That's so cool. I love that. And it keeps you connected to the community that you're supporting at the same time, which is pretty neat. For people that are listening to this, what would you tell them? I mean, what I think is so neat is, first of all, you found a way to kind of work together in your professional life as well as in your personal life. You both have found a way to kind of support your family and build your own business. It's not an easy thing to do. Also, kind of stay connected to this place that's so meaningful to your marriage and your life. So what advice would you give people who are listening to this saying, man, that sounds amazing, but I could never do that? Like, what would you tell them? What advice would you give them?
I would say if you can just try it, then go ahead and try it. You said it earlier, like now with Shopify and Wix and GoDaddy and whoever else, it's fairly easy to build a website. So just go ahead and start somehow, do a little bit. You don't have to quit your job and go and raise $100 million to start a company and have a whole team of people. You can probably just go ahead and try it. Obviously, it depends on what you want to do. But for a lot of people, you can just do this. So just go ahead and try it and dip your foot in it and see what happens. See if you do like all the problems that come with owning your own business and people being happy and unhappy and suppliers sometimes failing you and then dealing with all these problems. Just if you can give it a shot, maybe set aside a set amount of money. Like if you go to a casino, and you decide, okay, I have $1,000. I'm going to lose this $1,000 potentially. I'm not going to lose more. If I hit 1,000, I'm leaving. You can do the same with your business. Just set aside whatever you want. Let's say 5,000. I'm going to start with this 5,000. If I blow this, I'm going to be out $5,000 and I'll move on. I don't know. That's one way to do it.
Yeah, I think being open to failing, obviously, this was not all unicorns and rainbows for us. There might have been a box of fish that arrived thawed to Florida back in 2018 when we were trying this all out. Start with your friends and family. They're a forgiving audience. And find a Captain Pip, find a mentor in your industry who you can pick their brain and call, not even to ask logistical questions, but just to get support when you need it. It's important to have a network, especially. I think that's been one of the hardest things for me is not being on a team all the time. So building your external team of mentors and support people to help you along the way is really important.
Everybody can have their own way. There are 100 different ways of how to start your own business. And somebody has one way of doing it. Somebody maybe just got an idea and they do raise $100 million and then they launch a product and they're super successful. And somebody else might just start it with 5,000. So there are so many ways of making it happen. But if you have something that you're passionate about, you should try to make it happen because you might regret it in 30, 40 years, or you will always have the what if. You don't want to have the what if. Just give it a shot.
Well, on that note, that's a great point. Like you, I was a journalism major. I didn't know anything about finance or business when I started my first business. I have a tendency to learn the hard way. So my life philosophy is make every mistake once. And that's typically how I learn. So a question I ask all of my guests, and I'd like to pose to both of you, is as you think back on your journey with Alaska Fresh, what's the biggest mistake you've made and what did you learn from it?
That's a good one.
My biggest mistake, and I still do this, is I go on social media, I get sucked into social media, and I look at our competitors and I say, oh my God, look what they're doing. We're not doing that. And then I spiral. So I'm still trying to train myself out of that. That isn't like a one huge concrete story, but I mean, obviously know your competition, but don't get caught up in what they're doing. Don't let that trip you up mentally.
That's a good point. You're right. You have to stay focused.
I have to agree with Adra 100%. It has been often kind of a discouraging point for me when I get an idea like, oh my God, we could bring fish from Alaska and pack them in smaller boxes and then ship them to someone. And then I go online and I find out, oh, somebody else is already doing it. And I feel like, okay, well, somebody else is already doing it. So I shouldn't even try to start this business because it makes no sense. It's already out there. But that's not how any of this works. When Burger King started, there was already McDonald's. Bet you would want to own Burger King these days. And then after that, 200 other chains popped up and they are all successful in their own ways. You can always bring something new. You can always innovate, or you can maybe find people that they were not able to find. Don't get discouraged by competition because it's very easy. And there is, especially in today's world of internet and online and everybody being connected, you can find almost anything at all times. So you get an idea just because you found it somewhere else or somebody else is already doing it. That doesn't mean you shouldn't give it your own shot.
You're right. And I also used to fall victim to that. I still do. A friend of mine who owns, of all things, a Jeep parts business called Quadratech in the Northeast, who was on our show early. He was one of our second or third guests. He brought up an interesting point about this I had never thought of before. And he talked about the network effect, where he actually said, he's like, I love my competitors because my competitors are creating an awareness for our category that I couldn't afford to do on my own. But if there's 3 or 4 other companies that are competing with me that are all trying to reach the same consumer, and maybe they're advertising in a local market that I don't touch, or maybe they're advertising online in a way that I'm not doing it, it's still creating an awareness of the consumer that this category even exists. And maybe that consumer becomes educated and says, hey, I want to buy this thing, but maybe I don't want to buy it from you. And I start looking online and I find other companies. And so, his theory is that a rising tide lifts all ships. And I think that actually is probably true. And so it probably works for you guys as well.
That's a great way to look at it. And I would like to put that on our office wall since it's linguistically related. I'm going to keep that in mind.
There you go. Well, cool. This has been phenomenal and I've enjoyed our conversation. So Adrian, if people heard this and they want to learn more about your company, they want to learn about you, they want to buy some fish, where do they go? How do they learn more about Alaska Fresh?
People can visit us in our online store at alaskafreshsalmon.com/shop. They can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok at Alaska Fresh Salmon. And we always love communicating with people directly. You can send us an email to info@alaskafreshsalmon.com. We like to be your personal fishmongers and there's a lot of information out there, and we're happy to answer any questions that anyone has.
And I compliment your blog. There's some really good recipes and stuff on there too. Adra and Juro, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your time. That's the end of today's episode of OTSS. Let me know what you think by rating this podcast on the platform you are listening to. We are now posting the video to YouTube as well, so be sure to like and subscribe there at OTSS Podcast. I want to thank Alaska Fresh for coming on the show. Hope everyone has a great rest of their day. Thank you.